right. Keep looking at my phone. Got it. Okay. All right. All right. Everything looks like it's going. Got it. Okay. Let me see. Yes, it's live on here. All right. And just in case. Everything looks like it's going. All right. Are you guys ready to get going? I just want to make sure. Here. And I'm going to mute this.
Yeah, I am good.
All right. I hope everybody is ready. All right. So welcome to Vertex Live. Here at a podcast where we invite industry professionals to talk about today's industry with art and entertainment and get a feel for what's up in the future and to make you guys better and successful in your pursuits. All right. And today we're joined by Jacob. How you doing today, Jacob?
Good. I just landed in Stockholm, so I've been away for a little bit, taking a bit of a vacation, and yeah, now I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
And also, John Mark is going to be here today. It's been a couple weeks, but I hope you're all ready to go today. And
I'm good
just
to go.
making sure our audio is all good. I think there was just a little bit of reverberation from my camera, from my TV. All right, I think everything's good now. Cool. All right. So, Jacob, want to start off with just, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and kind of going over who you are and what you do in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jacob. I currently live in Sweden, Stockholm, where I also work. So right now I work at a studio called Fall Damage, and we are doing a competitive shooter. And I'm a little bit lead of environment and concept, and doing a bit of the art direction of the environments also. So that's my current job. And I would say I have tried a little bit of everything. So I started with indie right during school, basically. Started a company with friends and got to try indie. And after that, I went to something a bit bigger and worked on the Walking Dead game. And then I tried one of the biggest, which was Ubisoft. Got to work on Avatar and Division with Vegetation in mind. But then I felt like, I was missing a little bit, maybe the mid-sized studios. So like 2.5 years ago, I joined Fall Damage, basically.
All right. Awesome. And aside from that, we'll also give away the secret that you're also a mentor here at Vertex for the second and third term of environment art. And it's also a pleasure of mine also to say that we have history together and you were a mentor of mine and were extremely helpful in my pursuits.
That makes me very happy to hear. Yeah, I mean, I've been, it's funny because I've been at Vertex School exactly the same time as I joined Fall Damage. So they are basically coexisting for me. And I think like my first lead job and doing mentoring at the same time, helped me a lot, because like doing this every week, like getting different scenes and trying to figure it out with the students, or I feel like I grow as much as the students are doing, and it's also very inspiring. So makes me want to do my own scenes, and I keep doing that because I see all the fun project that everyone is working on.
That's awesome. I completely identify with that. As a mentor as well, it's just when you see students succeeding and you see all these problems, them overcoming like these difficulties, it's super inspiring to go forward. So from there, so let me see. I'm sorry, I kind of got myself lost. So I know in your portfolio, you have a bit of stylized and you have a bit of realistic work. Which one do you prefer to work in as an industry professional? And then
it's like putting my two darlings against each other. I mean, I would say like I try to maybe do what I'm not doing at work at home. Basically, that's always kind of the goal. So I love the both styles as similar much because I mean, with stylized, you get to do a little bit more ZBrushing. It's more about like maybe really pay attention to the silhouette and colors. But then you do that a little bit in realism also. But then it's maybe more about like really focusing on reference and applying realism to it with some type of tweak to it. But so far, I've mainly been working with realism or semi-realism at work. And then at home, I usually do stylized. But I would say if I ever got the opportunity, let's say fall damage would switch to stylized, I wouldn't complain. And I know some of my fellow environment artists at the studio wouldn't complain either.
I gotta say, I love stylized work, and I really loved your tree when I first met you. I wanted to, first find out if you were a good mentor and a good match for myself. And the tree, and so that magical tree, and you also had the Hogwarts, the Christmas, their eating room. I thought both of those were just blew me away, and I was like, all right, this is definitely the guy I want.
Oh, thanks.
When
I have a funny story about the Hogwarts scene.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I actually started that. So I went to something similar to Vertex School that doesn't exist anymore. That was led by a industry person, and that was my scene during that time. But it was too hard to finish, and I kind of learned the lesson of creating too big environment too early, not having the knowledge. But it was eating me inside that I never finished it. So
you went back to it.
Yeah, after 4 years in the industry, I went back to it, completely reworked it, and was a very nice feeling finishing it 5 years after I started it initially. But yeah, I usually have that as a good reminder to maybe not go too big too early.
And what is the saying? Your work is never finished, it's only abandoned. So
yeah,
realistically, it's perfectly fine to come back to it, because I'll tell you, I love that piece. I also don't know, did you ever finish the bath piece? I remember
the capybara scene. Yeah, so that one is so I have like my 10 almost finished projects, and I jump between them. I would say one thing is right now, like portfolio, when you start coming up in seniority, is not as important, I would say. So now it's more for fun and learning. So I usually kind of like switch between the project, what I'm most excited about. So next week I'm going to finish up a scene from my youth town, basically, and after that is capybara scene. So the goal is to do the capybara scene before I leave to Japan in a month.
Awesome.
So before I leave to Japan, I'm gonna, because that's a little bit homage to Japan, basically, that scene.
Yeah, because I remember seeing that, and I was so ready to see the ending of that, because it looks beautiful.
Oh, thanks. The problem with that one is that I'm trying to learn animation with it, and it's very, I don't know. Yeah, everyone knows here that is learning right now. It's hard to learn. Like it takes time and it takes back and forth, and you can't do it on the first try. And I get very humbled because I try new things, and I remind myself how really hard it is to learn, really. So right now it's basically animations is my new thing to learn, basically.
Believe me, I know all about kind of breaching out into new frontiers and territories. Well. And I just want to kind of step back for a second. You were talking about the different projects you've been involved in, and you threw out some really, really nice ones, especially like The Walking Dead. But what was your favorite project to work on?
So, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, and if it has an NDA, if it's your current one and you're under NDA, we understand.
No, so I think I'm going to be very biased with that question and say the current one. But I think all project has given me something, and I look back at them, all of them fondly, even if some were more stressful than others. But I would say the current one is very special for me because it's the first one I want to play. So I've been gone for it for a week now, and I'm a bit envy when I see my coworkers on Steam playing our game, and I can't join because I'm on vacation. So it's kind of a cool feeling to work on a game that you also are very excited to play, because that's not always like it's not always the case, because usually like in productions, games are very unfinished for a long time, and our goal is to always every Friday have a finished game, basically a shippable build, basically. So our game is always playable, which makes it very fun. But I mean, my first project, I learned so much doing that. That project started with never open an engine before, and then we clicked open on a Unity, and it was just basically learn by doing. And we were sending people to like GDC and E3 without even having a game, and kind of like trying to get like funding. So it kind of like built a incentive to kind of really learn quickly and stuff like that. Because yeah, it was during school also, so it was a very nice side teaching basically for me to do that. And then yeah, Walking Dead was very cool because I'm a Walking Dead fan, especially the first two scenes or the first season. So that was kind of like a cool to work on a big IP, and then with Avatar to do Vegetation with some of the best people that do Vegetation. So I would say for me, it's kind of like every project has their thing that was kind of like cool to get to experience. But yeah, the current one is probably the favorite one.
That's awesome.
Now, if I remember correctly, you have an interesting story about Vegetation and how you got started in Vegetation.
Yeah, I mean, because I get the question a lot with art tests and interviews and stuff like that. And I would say it's always different. Like every interview and art test I've done has been so different. And when I did the interview for Ubisoft, they just called me randomly. I applied because they opened up a new studio in Stockholm, and it was basically ex-DICE people that started it. So the senior level there was insane, and really wanted to go there to just learn. And I applied when they had like open applications. So that would be a tip to always do that, because I think a half year later they called me, and they said from someone they heard that I really like to do Vegetation. But I basically never done Vegetation. It was basically only my hotel scene with those 2 trees on the side there. But I said, yes, I love Vegetation. And they're like, awesome. Let's set up
you
a
got
meeting.
The job.
Yeah, I'm not that easy, but they basically said, let's meet up next week. So I panicked a little bit. That was a Friday. So I sat the whole weekend building an avatar, because I knew they worked on Avatar. So I built an avatar scene basically to learn Vegetation. And I brought that to the interview. And that basically made that I didn't have to do an art test even, because I basically made an art test before even having the interview for them. And in my mind, it was a little bit like, if I were sitting on their side, what would I really like? What would make me feel like that person really want to work there? Yeah, probably bringing an art test that they did the weekend before the first interview. So that was kind of my plan of it. Also being able to say something about Vegetation in general. So, and I got it. So I guess it works.
Hey, listen, it sounds like it was a great idea to begin with.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm curious, because I know you mentioned that you did some online training before. How much would you say was kind of, self-taught training, and then how much would you say is more of the formal kind of training?
So I went to a university with a bachelor, and I felt very early that bachelor was more focusing on serious games, which is games for applications for maybe firefighters and so on, driving cars and stuff like that, more games for education. And they were not that connected to the video game industry, so they didn't have any industry people. And for me, it was very hard to keep up the inspiration. I had some fellow student that inspired me, but I kind of felt I was missing that person who can tell me about the cool stories about the industry and kind of like paint a picture how it is really to study to work in the industry. So I found that course during summer during my studies, and it was Jason Stokes who worked on Guild Wars. He was an environment artist there, and for me it was very inspiring to see someone work real time, seeing them and also talk about my stuff and see how they kind of like saw my progress and what I was doing wrong. I think just that inspiration, and I would say thanks to him, I picked up concept arting because he was doing environment art, but also doing paint overs and doing full-fledged concepts. And I thought that was a cool combination of an environment artist and a concept artist. So that was also something that, thanks to him, like I was very inspired to pick that up, and I'm using that as my main tool at work now, 10 years later, basically.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I would say probably the biggest part there, but then I had my game company, and that was the self-taught bit, I think, and that taught me a little bit about other stuff. And I would say with school, maybe the cool thing there was that I met people and could kind of like interact with people. But I would say that's become much better with like Discord and stuff like that. Like when I did my course, it was a forum basically.
Okay, so this is the old school.
It was very old school.
Okay.
I mean, it was, I think it was like 8 years or no, 10 to 8 years ago or something. I did that course.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And did you always want to be an artist, and was environment arts always kind of your first choice as a discipline?
So when I was a kid, I was always drawing a lot. Like I did a lot of Donald Duck drawings and Bamse, who is kind of like our Donald Duck in Sweden. And I noticed that like painting stuff and giving it to people made them very happy, and I kind of liked that feeling. So I kept that going, and I kind of wanted to be a comic book artist for a long time.
Oh, wow.
But then it kind of disappeared when I went to, I guess you call it high school in America, and I kind of starting to go more towards economy because my dad is a computer economy teacher, so maybe going a little bit towards his field. But then when I was kind of like deciding which university I wanted to go, I kind of asked myself, do I really want to do economy, and am I going to be happy? And I kind of like said no and said video games. I play them, but I don't know much about them. I was a big movie buff, so but there was no movie schools here, so I said like, let's try video games. So I basically went to the school without knowing what 3D was. Like I didn't know what Maya was and all of that stuff, basically.
Got it. Okay.
But luckily, I really fell in love with it. Like my plan was to go to movies and do Pixar, but I loved the workflow in video games, so I stayed in video games, basically.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And a little random, but I think he told me once, if I remember right, that you grew up on a farm.
And not farm, but with a lot of animals. Like we
Close
had
enough.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, people called it a farm. Like there is other people around, but we had a sanctuary for animals, basically. So all kind of some wild animals that we took care of, that people called in, and a lot of like animals that basically didn't have a home.
Gotcha.
So it was a nice thing to grow up with.
I bet.
Absolutely. That sounds very compassionate and very, like, were you guys helping them out with like injuries and such, or?
Yeah, so it was my sister who was driving this, and she's a farmer now, so she kept going with it. So it was her kind of thing, but we kids were kind of like side helping a little bit. But yeah, it was basically part of a, what you call it, like a help organization that picks up when people call when there is a hurt animal. They have to drive them somewhere to take them, and we were one of those places basically where people could leave a hurt wild animal, basically.
Awesome. That's really cool. And
yeah, makes me miss having animals, because now I live in an apartment, so I don't have any.
I could see where that'd be a huge transition, going from like, a rural area to a more a more like urban area.
Yeah, that's why I go home always to kind of like come back to it a little bit. But yeah, someday probably I'm gonna live in the forest areas again.
Cool. Well, now, kind of taking a turn away from this, I'm going to ask you about one of the more controversial subjects in today's industry, and I'm sure you know where this is going.
Yeah.
So, with the rise of AI in art, and obviously it's affecting our industry, I wanted to kind of get like your feeling on the future of AI and how it might impact us as artists.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like I see a lot of predictions and a lot of opinions, and I'm trying to create my own, but I think I'm quite humble towards it, because it's so changing so fast, so it's so hard to predict where it's going. Because I think nobody really knows when it's going to plateau, or if it's ever going to plateau. And also the speed it's happening. I think certainly we're going to change how we work. It's already changing a little bit, probably. Like I would say, like with ChatGPT, like having that as a Googling tool. Like I always talk to my students that Google is the most important tool for an environment artist. I would say it's probably switching to ChatGPT now, because it's a better Google tool. And I would say like you have like the mid journeys and stuff like that. And I would say how they were created is just a bit of a shame. And I think that the problem there is going to be kind of the copyright issues for big companies. Like I'm pretty sure that they are not going to touch them, because if they start into like bring that into their games now, and there is a lawsuit maybe a year or two in the future, they might need to change the whole product if they release in 3 years. So I think all the companies are staying back and looking a little bit what the laws are going to say about AI in the future. But I mean, Ubisoft went out with a new tool last week for game writers, where AI is going to help to kind of shift through the words and stuff like that. So we're probably going to see a lot of like helping tools. Maybe we get the perfect UV unwrapper that everyone have asked for always. But yeah, I think for me it's always been that like in our industry it's moving very fast. Like what I did when I was doing textures before PBR was a thing, when you were sitting and painting the specular map by hand. So it was before Substance Painter.
Yep.
So it's always been kind of like a change. And when you are inside of it, you don't realize it that much. But when I've looked back, there's been a lot of introductions. I mean, Quixel with their textures and just the vegetation. Have someone told me that when I started, I would be like, whoa. So I think the only difference now is it's probably going to be much more rapid. But I think the important part is to kind of like always read into it and look on the horizon, and kind of like being prepared for it, basically. So I would say, yeah, it's very hard to predict, but there is going to be changes. And I mean, I think almost a bigger change is like Fortnite's new tool, where they kind of like took inspiration from Roblox. So they're going to have community-based build games now, which is going to enable anyone to make games now. And I mean, if you look at Roblox, the amount of money they have earned on that, and how many games have been created. Like when I look at my sister's kids, they're basically just playing Roblox nowadays. Of course, a little bit Pokemon, but mainly Roblox, because it's so much content, and the content is created by the community. So I would say that's a big shift, especially now when Epic is doing it with their engine. So you're going to have Unreal 5 with Lumen and Nanite, which makes it very easy for non-artists to create worlds. So that's going to probably be a thing. You have Minecraft. Like I had a student who worked for a company that made Minecraft mods basically,
Really?
and he had a salary on that. And I didn't know about that before he told me about that. So I think the game development sphere is so large. Like you have metaverse, how now that's gonna change. It seems to crumble a little bit now, but that might be also a venture for the future also. So I think the amount of things that needs artists is expanding quite big, but we maybe don't see it that clearly. So I think that's kind of exciting. Because the thing I'm most excited about that is to see kind of like games from both from people that would maybe never make a game or couldn't do a game before, like from countries that are maybe not there yet to make games, but have stories to tell. So that's probably what I'm looking forward to see.
That
games
cool.
being created from in countries that hasn't released that many games. I think there's still going to be like the triple A's and the 2A's and indies, just going to be more basically.
That, yeah, I love the fact that you look at it more as a potential tool than an opponent we need to fight. So I think that's important for us artists is, no matter how much we push back on this, it's something that's coming and the people that are financing see the benefits of it. So it's awesome that you're seeing it more as a tool.
Yeah, and I mean, what's happened in 10 or 20 years, nobody knows. And probably the world, like what happens then is going to probably make the whole world different. So I always kind of look back at maybe if we don't do any works in 20 years that some people predict, I'm still happy to create probably because I like the process. So I still do paintings traditionally or so, but maybe never earn money on them. So I think that's also important to remember to try to have that artistry inside of you. Because for me, if I wouldn't have this job, I would do it. I mean, I do it already on my free time, even if I have the job now. So that's kind of my long perspective on the thing. But for now, I think it's going to be hopefully a bit slowing down. I mean, some people are talking about stopping it a little bit now, like chill, but we will see. I think in the beginning, it's going to mainly be a tool. And when we get that create game button, I think that's probably 10 years from now. But like I said, I'm just guessing.
For sure.
And so, excuse me, I got a fire in my throat. So, other than that, sorry. So with
you want me to hop in, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. How do you stay inspired and continue to innovate as an environmentalist? A complete 180 from the AI stuff. We can come back to the AI later if you want.
No, I'm happy to talk about the classical art things. I would say Vertex School is my main thing. Seeing new artists doing stuff, that's probably my most inspiring thing. But that's probably like an answer that a senior needs to hear, because when I started, I saw a lot of seniors not being so inspired anymore, and I was very afraid to end up there also. And I kind of learned by teaching, you kind of keep that fire, I feel like. I think for people starting, I would say there is several things. I would say not looking just at video games is the first thing. So I try to get inspired by just be outside walking, seeing stories being created outside. There's all the small things happens all the time. And I think adding those to your scenes and stuff like that adds a lot. I would say being in a community. So especially before Corona, I went to drink and draws which was basically artists in Stockholm meeting up, taking a coffee after work and sitting and sketching after work in a cafe and just talking. But just that interaction and hearing other artists talk about their things and kind of like what they do, even maybe being other type of artists, really made me inspired to try new things, especially. I would say when you end up in a studio, what I would really say that I see a lot of people not do in the studios are talking to the other disciplines. So when I was at the Starbase in-house, I always went to the designers, hanged out with them, just chit-chatting, trying to understand them. Same with the concept artists, the audio people, the animation team. Like I try to always interact with all the different disciplines. Because for me, like and that's the cool thing with video games. It's very like community-based effort where a lot of very different types of artists or people come together and create something, and they need to talk to each other to make that game that everyone wants to make. So I would say probably those things. Yeah.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Any kind of strategies that you kind of use to maintain your enthusiasm and energy, especially with projects that last a really long time?
Yeah, well, I would say one thing is to, and I'm sometimes bad at it, like leave the computer. I would say go outside, interact with other people, because it's very easy that your project becomes the end of the world, and it's just going to put stress on you. So especially when I did art tests, I always like time slot my art tests, and I added those kind of like walk outside, just listen to the birds, basically times. And I think that have helped me on all the art tests, but also kind of like on my projects to kind of like leave them behind. So for example, now I'm working on my Borås theater scene, and I wanted to release it before I went on vacation. But I said, let's sleep on it for that vacation, basically. So I left it for a week, and now I see a lot of things I kind of like can fix and stuff like that. So I think those pauses are very nice. I even did them so it's easy for me that doesn't have to release anything, but I even did them when I didn't have a job. So when I did my hotel scene and I did my Last of Us room scene, I actually remember kind of going away from it a week or two.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just looking at it. It's a bit of the idea of when you do concept art, you flip the image a lot. So you flip them, mirroring them to get like a new view on them. And that idea I have a little bit with like leaving it for a week and just see it in new eyes and trying to see it as a first-time viewer, because it's very easy to kind of like
get that tunnel vision.
Yeah. So I would say those things. Then I would say like what really inspired me is to kind of like look at what other people are doing in my field and trying to push myself to get to that level also. So yeah, those things would probably be it.
Okay. And it sounds like that would help a lot with having creative blocks and just in general. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would say like creative blocks. One thing I did that kind of like took that fear away a little bit from me, I did everyday drawing for 3 years almost. So I did like one drawing every day for 3 years. And it was during the time I wanted to learn to become a concept artist. And that kind of took away that like, what should I draw feeling? Because you don't have, if you do it every day, it kind of disappeared. So after a while, it became kind of like just do something basically. And that's kind of like how now I don't do every days anymore. But that's kind of how I treat it. Like if I have my scene, I just take like a piece and kind of work on that day. But I think for students that are a bit unsure, I think deadlines and time slotting and stuff like that would also be very beneficial. So kind of having a goal for when you want to finish your scene and so on can really help.
Okay. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I'm sorry, you're gonna say something, Paul?
Oh yeah, if I could just kind of ask a question.
Yeah.
One of the students was asking, what is the most unique application that you have seen as an environment artist?
Application like program, or
I would think like Houdini or like
okay.
Substance Painter and such.
Yeah, I mean, I like when I was at Ubisoft, we got to do a Houdini boot camp for a week, where they flew in a Houdini teacher. So that was a ride. And I would say I'm not the most programmer friendly person. I would say I'm more to the art side, but it was very cool to experience Houdini and see what you can do and understand what you can ask for. But I would say probably like for me, like what Unreal 5 has become, because I started with it when it was still called UDK. So it was before Unreal 4. And see what it was then to now is very mind-blowing for me. I mean, at work, I still do bake lighting, which is very cumbersome. Every time you move an object, you need to rebake. And rebaking an environment seen in a game, like our environments, they can take hours to bake, and it's very powerful computer that bakes that. So when we started, it was like 30 hours to bake. Now it's down to maybe 6 hours or 5 hours.
Oh wow!
So I would say like Lumen with Nanite is very exciting, and I think most studios are gonna switch to it when everything is figured out. It has some quirks still, but I think releasing it and letting everyone figure it out is kind of like the right way to go. I would say probably Unreal 5 for me.
Awesome.
All right.
And I'm going to be a bit biased and say Blender also as a
Blender.
But I think the cool thing with Blender and Unreal is that they are both free, so anyone can become become a game developer nowadays. And coming from a Maya background, where it was very expensive to have Maya after being a student, it's very cool to see.
100%.
Absolutely.
Another question I have for you, Jacob, is
yeah.
What advice would you say you could give aspiring game artists who are really struggling to find their creative voice, or just struggling with motivation in general in their work?
Yeah, I mean, I was there, and I kind of remember trying to not forget that time, because I was during the time we did our indie game, that was cool, but it felt a little bit like we were not really inside of the industry right yet, like still kind of earning a little bit money because we had funding, but it was not like I'm in the industry. I'm kind of half in the industry. And I remember quite clearly being very demotivated because our group was also kind of like struggling. I mean, we didn't have an HR that kind of like looked at the the feeling of the studio and stuff like that. It was basically just a bunch of juniors creating a studio. So that took a quite toll. And I would say what really helped me back then was I found a like Dynasty community on Discord, and there is so much more now, but back then it was the only one. And being able to sit with other artists and having the same goal, I would say was the biggest change for me. So kind of like sending over stuff to them, but taking stuff from them and feedbacking on each other's stuff, and trying to kind of like go to the goal together to enter the industry. And that kind of like clicked for me to really be getting there. And it's so cool now to see people that was in that community and see them in different studios. So I would say probably that for me. And I think I was bad at it in the beginning also, like I mean, even when I did that online school, I was not the most interactive person with other students. I was kind of like tunnel vision my own stuff. I would say try to interact with other students, because that's going to be your work later in the lane when you are in the industry. Like then you are really then the studios want you to interact with other artists. So kind of getting used to that already when you are studying is probably both beneficial for when you are working later, but also when you are kind of struggling.
Okay. What kind of personal interests or hobbies outside of work would you say kind of play a big role in your creative process and overall approach to environment arts?
I would say, like I said, I'm a big movie buff, probably bigger movie buff than game buff. Like I don't play that many games, but I watch a lot of movies, and I would say that helped me to have a different vision, a little bit more cinematic vision, and trying to push that aspect. I would say traveling and traveling to places that I've never been to and seeing stuff in reality really put a spark in the creative mind, I think. So that's helped me a lot. It would been a bit tricky now during Corona, but I think when I go to Japan in a month, I'm probably I'm gonna have millions idea when I come back, probably, if I know myself. So I can feel that, like before Corona, I went to Spain, and just being there and just taking in how light works in Spain, because light works differently everywhere, and then also the nature and all of that. And I was right when I was becoming a vegetation artist, so I was like obsessed looking at all the vegetation. So yeah, I would say being outside, like I love nature. I moved now recently to a national park here close to in Stockholm, basically, so I can always kind of like just walk in the forest and take that in a little bit. Yeah, I would say those things. I do 2D animations and 2D drawing a lot, and the struggle of that has helped me a lot. It's very time consuming, but it's very rewarding when you're finishing a filmed movie or so. So I would say that. So I try to kind of like do a little bit of everything and have fun with it.
Okay, that's awesome.
If you wouldn't mind, I have a couple questions coming in from the students.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, by all means.
All right. So I have one student asking about, is there a industry, is there a good idea of how to do an internship in the industry?
Yeah, so the tricky part with answering internship is that they are different in every country. So I can mainly just talk for Sweden. And I would say in Sweden, most of the studios here are basically working together with so we have a system in Sweden which we call working university, basically, and their job is to get people, it's more focused on just pure work and getting you into the industry when you're done with that university, and they need to fill a quota to exist because they get money from our government. And all of those schools here in Sweden work together with the big companies, so Ubisoft, Starbreeze, DICE, and so. So I haven't heard that many interns getting jobs in or getting like a position in Sweden. It's mainly those people. But I would say like an intern, because that usually gets paid by them getting kind of finance from the government and stuff like that. Like when we study in Sweden, we don't pay. We only pay like living costs, but all the other stuff is free here. So basically, those interns are kind of like not being paid, but they get to learn for free, and then they become a junior after 6 months, basically here. But I would say like just getting in as a junior is kind of the same thing, but it's paid then instead. And I've seen kind of like people coming in as juniors overseas to Sweden even. So I would like aim for junior positions, basically. Like if you're good, they want you probably. And if you're inside of Europe, it's not that hard for a studio to get you there. It's a bit trickier if you're outside of Europe for like a Swedish company.
Okay. And to kind of expand upon that question, then, since you're saying, like, because I understand the idea of, when you're intern, you're kind of working for free. I think what then would be how, and kind of going on to another question, if you want to stand out to a future employer, to a studio, could you give some advice on the best way to kind of like make your portfolio appealing for a future studio?
Yeah, I always kind of like say to try to build your kind of portfolio to certain studios you want to work for. So I would probably not build a portfolio that works both for Blizzard and Ubisoft, because they are so like apart. But like a Ubisoft/Naughty Dog style of portfolio would be closer, and that's kind of like how I built my portfolio. I could kind of like had always background pictures from those games. I had my before PureF, I think I used just Photoshop as my reference board. So that was before PureF came. But I always placed my screenshot around Last of Us pictures or Uncharted 4 pictures, and just kind of like worked my stuff until they blend in there. And that was very good for me, because I always feel like if you just get like 90% there, I mean, a junior that does 90% of quality of a Naughty Dog game is probably very employable for most studios that are doing semi-realism style. And that's kind of what I did, like just being pure honest with myself, maybe ask friends to look at my picture next to the other ones and ask if they see a difference without telling them which one is mine, stuff like that. But yeah, I would say don't spread too much. So I did stylize. Like I said, I started stylized, but I didn't have anything stylized in my portfolio. I added it more when I was in the industry, when it's not as important to be more kind of like focused. So I would say like focus on probably one style and try to really do what that studio is doing that you want to go to. And I would say be open to go to maybe not the most famous studios. I would say 2A studios are very good to go to, because the difference is that they are smaller, which gives you a little bit more maybe to do in a studio like that. So you probably learn a little bit more. Like I was very happy to end up in Starbase, that is a mid-sized studio, because I got a lot of responsibility, and I probably grew most there. At like that growth I did those 2 years I was there was very big for me.
And one last question. I have a question here. It's what is your environmental tools in your, like, what programs or applications do you use as an environment artist?
So that question would be depending on where I am, because at home it's a bit different from work. So at work we don't do any texturing in Substance Painter. All our texturing is basically more done inside of Unreal with Vertex painting. So the tools are all in Blender there. Basically, we do floating decals as details instead of baking high poly, low poly. So we don't do any low poly, high poly baking. But I can take it maybe what's more common. That would be kind of like what I did, what I do at home, and that would be I use Blender for modeling. And then I use Marmoset usually for baking, but I would say Painter works there also. But I have a license on Marmoset, and I kind of prefer it to bake. And then I do Painter, Substance Designer for textures. And I would say don't feel like you have to create everything from scratch in Substance Designer. Many industry people start from a base, from maybe a high texture from Quixel, and then change it inside of Designer, or make a ZBrush sculpt and add color to it in Designer. So the idea of Designer is not always to have to like do everything in Designer. And then I would say it's basically just Unreal and Photoshop. And I would say Photoshop is probably still my favorite software to use. Like I'm a very hard Photoshop user. Like I always have Photoshop open. That's the only application I never close, because I use it that much. And for me, it's a very strong tool to to R&D, so research and development, when you're trying to figure out stuff. So for example, when I did vegetation at Avatar, I always kind of sketched out my vegetation like for the texture plane. I did that in Photoshop also always, and placed it in the world and run around and got to feel how it feels, instead of sitting and modeling and then put it out and then it doesn't work. So I think that kind of rapid workflow with Photoshop is always fun. Same with textures. Like I always sketch out my trim sheet textures or my tileable. Like if I do a brick texture, I can sketch it out. And it doesn't need to look perfect. They just need to kind of like bring the idea how big it is. So the idea there is to kind of pre-plan the size of the texture and stuff like that. So Photoshop is a very big one. And I mean, you don't have to pay for Photoshop. You can use Krita or GIMP. They are free versions that are quite similar also. Yeah, so those would be it, I think.
Okay. I don't want to pass up on the gold that you threw out before. When we were talking about portfolios and we we're talking about different things, you had commented on in the past your like with the Hogwarts scene, your biggest like falter was the scope. And I think that's not a unique issue to yourself. I feel a lot of students have a really hard time kind of gauging their scope. Like, could you give some advice on when moving into a portfolio piece, like planning it out, how should a student start to think about the scope of their piece?
Yeah, I think it's awesome that you bring that up, because I would apply that to the previous question, how to enter a studio. I think scale is probably what you can win most of. Because when you look at, so let's say we look at kind of like the video games we play, and I want to create that. It's very easy to forget that you're looking at something that's made by several environment artists, a couple of outsourcing people, a pipeline that's already defined, an art director that defined in the style, a lighting artist, a material. There's so many artists working on that picture that you're looking at. And then go back and remember that you're just doing it alone. So I think scaling down is one way to be able to kind of like do what they do in that big scale, like that Elden Ring scale. Doing that just in a small room, confined room that has the same amount of detail, but it's more confined. It's just going to make it easier and less frustrating to get to that quality. And I would say, like, when we look at portfolio, we never look at quantity. Maybe if it's a senior, it would be more about quantity, because then it's the workflows are changing a little bit, like when you come to the senior. But the only important thing when you are juniors to kind of being able to create what the studio is creating, because all of the other stuff you're going to learn by the way, basically. And I would say it's much more fun to have those small scenes that you can really focus in and get that quality and being happy with it. So all my first scenes have just one single shot, and that helped me a lot. I always worked with just one composition shot, and then I created some like extra shots inside of that shot. But I didn't like I did a mistake with the Harry Potter scene. I did a 360 playable environment, and yeah, that's why it took 5 years to wrap that scene up, basically. But all the other projects have been confined. And now when I'm at my maybe 6, 7 project, I'm starting to spread out a little bit and make them bigger and bigger. But I would say for the first scenes, try to confine it as much as possible, because you're learning the new workflows at the same time as you're trying to create something that is the same quality as an industry piece, basically.
All right, that's awesome.
So you're doing double, basically, the amount of work that an industry person is doing.
Right, because you're learning and creating at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. That makes sense.
And I'm sorry, do you have a question, Mark?
Well, I was just gonna ask Jacob if he just had any general advice for students who are trying to break into the industry as an environment artist.
Yeah, I would say like be honest with your portfolio. Like the first thing would be, of course, the portfolio. Like the portfolio don't need to be big. Like I would always trim your portfolio. Every time you release a scene, ask the first scene you did, is it strong enough? So I have basically in the beginning I kind of cut while I was moving forward, and that can hurt a little bit. But I created an Instagram content to be able to place all of my kind of like not industry things there. So I would kind of treat your ArtStation as just pure portfolio, and then more exploration, tryouts and stuff like that, maybe on ArtStation blog, Twitter or Instagram. So I do that. And the cool thing with that is I can look back and see my progression on Instagram. It's like a history timeline for me a little bit also. I would say try a little bit with social media interaction. Like I'm not the biggest fan of social media. I try to do it to a certain amount, but it had helped me a lot to post my stuff on Twitter, LinkedIn, to get like some eyes on it, and then go that to ArtStation and push my stuff up, because you never know who sees you on like a trending page. And I think that have helped me sometimes, especially LinkedIn. I would say post always your stuff there, and try to remember also, which I see a lot of people not do, is that you put a lot of effort in like making that perfect shot with all that detail and stuff like that, but then you maybe don't post the best kind of like the best shot that present your work in the context of LinkedIn or another website. So try to do custom things for maybe LinkedIn. So maybe a video that plays basically when people scroll, they click on that more. Or maybe brighten it up a little bit so people click it more. Stuff like that, I would say, can help. The other thing would be join and interact communities. So, I mean, I have an artist at our studio that I kind of, I picked him because I saw him on the Dynasty community when I was interacting there a lot previously. And I saw how he was active, and I could see his growth and how he interacts with other people. And I would say our industry is small enough so you cannot remember people online also. So I would say be active and be a good person online can really help also a lot. Then I would say, I mean, it doesn't hurt to maybe reach out to the studios that you're interested in. So one thing I did a lot was looking at the studios that I wanted to go and look at their junior artists and look at their portfolio, and maybe even writing to them, because I think not many people write to junior artists. So they get probably very happy if an inspiring artist write to them and ask them a little bit. So you're probably going to get a very good answer maybe. So I would maybe ask them how they kind of enter the studio, and then you have that person is remembering you when you apply. So usually when we have an application, we go through it in the team sometimes, and then maybe that junior artist that got that message, that person wrote to me and was really friendly and stuff like that. I remember that person. So it's a lot of those small things I think really helps. And then the last thing, and that's probably very based on where you live, but here in Stockholm, we have a big game development like city. So interacting in reality with people. So we have a lot of like meet and greets, like bar meet and greets, or like the drink and draw I talked about. I went to figure drawing and I realized that it's mainly just game artists there. So you kind of talk to them. And I think always putting yourself with a face, like a real, especially like a real face, adds really the chance for you to join a studio. Like they remember you from real life, helps really also. I would say those things helps probably.
Okay.
I could definitely see how that would be very helpful. If you don't mind, John Mark, I actually have one question left over.
Go for it.
So we're talking a lot about the positive ends of, like, what should a student do and stand out and all this. But I want to kind of touch upon the dark side of having your portfolio out there, going in for a job. How would you recommend a student deal with rejection from a studio? Just kind of like their first time out, they're like, all right, my stuff looks great. I'm doing my first art test. This is awesome. And they get a rejection notice.
Yeah, I think everyone has been there, so everyone feels that pain. I think the first thing I would try to remember is that in the end, it's a lot about luck also. You never know what happens on the other side. So let's say you apply and you do a good art test, like you feel it, maybe the people that are looking at your art test feels it, but it doesn't work that time. Maybe they have a recommendation inside of the studio of someone that someone worked with, and they take that person instead. But that doesn't mean that you are zeroed out from that company. You still are probably higher than new applications. And I have a good example of that. I think it's 2 or 3 of our environment artists did an art test for us, got a no. And then when I joined, I looked back on all the portfolios and we took them. So they basically 6 months later or a year later, they got asked if they want to join, and they got to join. So you never know if that no is going to be forever, basically. So I would say, remember that. And what I try to do is I try to somewhat use that fire. They say no to me, I'm going to prove them wrong, and try to kind of prove them wrong, I would say. So if I would get a no, I would kind of use that as seeing it maybe as they are missing out on me as an artist. So kind of take that to your next scene, basically. And if it's a good studio, you probably get some feedback on your art test, and I would kind of really take that feedback and apply it to your next portfolio. So maybe you had bad poly distribution or something like that. Maybe do a scene that has good poly distribution, and I would maybe even send that that new portfolio piece to that studio and say, hey, I did the art test a half year ago, and I got the feedback. I really appreciate that. So I did a new scene, and I addressed the feedback that you had on my art test. Here's my new scene. And they're like, oh, we are looking for a new artist. And you did what we wanted you to kind of learn before joining us. Let's take that person. So awesome. I would say being forward also would be a thing. So my first art test at Starbreeze, and my lead back then told me that later, that I was so scared during that art test. He felt the fear inside of me. And I went to the big city of Stockholm and never been there, all these high, tall buildings. And then I'm going up a golden elevator. That was the Starbreeze office.
Oh my.
And then and I come from my indie studio. We were barely was in a small confined box. And then they had even tap water, bubbly tap water. I was like, this is so much bigger. So I was very nervous then. But luckily that the lead environment artist could see past the nervousness and kind of see the passion I had for art and that I would probably grow in it. But yeah, I would say be prepared at the first art test you ever do, or the first interview. It's going to be a bit awkward. I think that's for everyone. Yeah. And for every art test I've done and every interview, it's become easier. So when you do the next art test, maybe try to remember kind of when you kind of stress through something, don't do it again, basically. So for every art test I did, I start planning them much more clearer and kind of time zone them and everything. So if it was a weekend test, I put almost when you went to school, basically. I eat here, I go on a walk here, and then I work for 3 hours, take a 15 minutes walk, and then I do a 2-hour session, and so on, basically. So yeah, I would say that helped me a lot with all the art tests after that.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Jacob. Thanks.
No problem.
I think the last question I want to run by you is, and I think it's a big question. Things to avoid on a portfolio.
Yeah, I would say the spread would be the first thing. So I think you want to see an artist that is kind of like knows what that artist want to do. So remember, the portfolio is not to kind of like my Instagram is very spread out. I do everything basically there, but I could never place it on my art station because then nobody would know what I really want to do. Like, does this person want to do like paintings or 3D or environments? So I even have like characters on my Instagram. So I would say like use your art station as like the purest form of what you want to do on a daily basis. And that can just be a one environment art piece. Like I have friends who join the industry with one piece. It doesn't need to be more. So I would say do that. And I would say also be honest with yourself, looking at other juniors that recently joined the industry and see kind of what they did. And I would say like also like remember portfolios to show that you can do what the industry is doing. So I would try to do somewhat similar to game development environment pieces. So of course it can be fun to do something that is maybe more cinematic, like movie-esque or to another field and stuff like that. I would probably save them for when you are in the industry and want to start to explore. But when you're starting out, I would really just kind of like do like if you want to do Ubisoft, do Assassin's Creed, but that takes place in Spain during the 1800s, and look at what they have done with their games and try to apply that. And that would be kind of like super cool for a Ubisoft studio to see a junior doing the same quality, but also like taking another theme that they've never done and doing it successful. And I would say if you have one of those scenes that are both strong in the research of Spain in the 1800s and the quality of a Ubisoft game, you probably would get a job from just that scene. But then then those parts are very important to look at basically. And then I would remember that it's not like portfolio is one thing, but like the person is what we really look at. So you get the interview, and the interview is there to see to you if you are like a team player, a person who's open to learn, who wants to involve with the studio, all of those things. So remember that to be an open person for new things and stuff like that. And be a curious artist basically. I think that's what we want from the juniors basically, bringing the new ideas in basically.
Okay, that was awesome, Jacob. Thanks. Do you have any last questions for Jacob, Paul?
I think I've gotten them all out. I just checked the chat just to make sure there were no additional questions, and it seems everyone is very satisfied with the answers they've gotten so far. Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
Awesome. Well, in that case, then I guess that's a wrap. Thanks for being awesome, Jacob, and joining us here today. Sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's always fun.
Absolutely. And thanks for, of course, being our mentor at Vertex.
Yeah, thanks for having me so long. I'm always happy to have the classes. So I'm starting two new class next week, and I'm already looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Us too. All right. Well, then you have a great rest of your day, my friend.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
And everybody else, have a great evening.